Shalom, good morning all. We today are on 1 Kings chapters 8 and 9, the dedication of the temple by Solomon and his prayer. Reading from chapter 8 verse 1, the ark is brought into the temple. Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the chief of the fathers of the children of Israel, unto King Solomon in Jerusalem, that they might bring up the ark of the covenant of Yahweh out of the city of David, which is Zion. And all the men of Israel assembled themselves unto King Solomon at the feast in the month of Etharim, which is the 7th month. And all the elders of Israel came, and the priests took up the ark, and they brought up the ark of Yahweh. And the elders of Israel came, brought up the ark of Yahweh and the tabernacle of the congregation, and all the holy vessels that were in the tabernacle, even those did the priests and the Levites bring up. And King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel that were assembled unto him were with him before the ark, sacrificing sheep and oxen that could not be told nor numbered for multitude. Verse 9. There was nothing in the ark save the 2 tables of stone which Moses put there at Horeb, when Yahweh made a covenant with the children of Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. And it came to pass, when the priests were come out of the holy place, that a cloud filled the house of Yahweh, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of Yahweh had filled the house of Yahweh. Verse 14, Solomon blessed his Yahweh God. And the king turned his face about and blessed all the congregation of Israel. And all the congregation of Israel stood. And he said, Blessed be Yahweh God of Israel, who spoke with his mouth unto David my father, which and hath with his hand fulfilled it, saying, Since the day that I brought forth my people out of Israel, I chose no city out of all the tribes of Israel to build an house, that my name might be therein. But I chose David to be over my people Israel. Verse 19. Nevertheless, thou shalt not build the house, but thy son that shall come forth out of the loins, he shall build a house unto my name. And Yahweh hath performed his word that he spoke, and I am risen up in the room of David my father, and sit on the throne of Israel, as Yahweh promised, and have built an house for the name of Yahweh, God of Israel. So there we have Solomon telling the congregation what happened. Basically, we have a narrative also of the meaning of the word fulfilled. Solomon explains that Yahweh said he would do something, and he did it. In other words, performed his word that he spoke, fulfilled it according to his promise. Nowhere in the Old Testament does God nor anyone say that his laws, commandments will be done away with, cancelled, etc. i.e., there's no prophecies of that such a thing. There are some prophecies that say a Messiah will be born, where and how he will die, etc., but nothing to do with cancelling the law. The nearest we get is Jeremiah 31:31 and Hebrews chapter 8 verse 8, speaking of the making of a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah only. That was of putting his laws in the minds and hearts of Israel, not taking the laws away. Having a new item does not mean the old or former one is destroyed. Do you only have one pot, shirt or other item? Did you always throw away the former one that you now only have one of everything? Obviously not. Does Matthew chapters 5 verse 15 mean righteousness is ended? Matthew 3:15 says, And Yeshua answering said unto him, Suffer it to be so, for thus it becometh us to fulfill all righteousness. Then he suffered him. So obviously, we still have righteousness. Did Noah's rainbow covenant end when Abraham got the next covenant of circumcision? Or do we still have rainbows? So the point is, a new covenant doesn't necessarily mean the old one's done away with. And in any case, there's no prophecy that says God will do away with his laws. Continue reading from chapters 18 verse 22, Solomon's prayer of dedication. And Solomon stood before the altar of Yahweh in the presence of all the congregation of Israel, and spread forth his hands towards heaven. And he said, Yahweh, God of Israel, there is no God like thee in heaven above, or on earth beneath, who keepeth covenant and mercy with the servants that walk before thee with all their heart. Verse 33. When thy people of Israel be smitten down before thy enemy, because they have sinned against thee, and shall turn again to thee, and confess thy name, and pray and make supplication unto thee in this house. Verse 35. When heaven is shut up, and there is no rain, because they have sinned against thee, if they pray towards this place, and confess thy name, and turn from their sin when thou afflictest them. Verse 41. Moreover, concerning a stranger that is not of thy people Israel, but cometh out of a far country for thy name's sake, for they shall hear of the great name, of thy great name, and of thy strong hand, and of thy stretched out arm, when he shall come and pray towards this house. Hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and do according to all that the stranger calleth to thee, for that all the people of the earth may know thy name, to fear thee, as do thy people Israel, and that they may know that this house which I have builded is called by thy name. Verse 47. Yet if they shall bethink themselves in the land whither they were carried captives, and repent, and make supplication unto thee in the land of them that carried them captives, saying, We have sinned, and have done perversely, we have committed wickedness, etc. Verse 53. For thou didst separate them from among all the people of the earth, to be thine inheritance, as thou spakest by the hand of Moses thy servant, when thou broughtest our fathers out of Egypt, O Yahweh God. So that's Solomon's prayer. You're supposed to read all of it. The verses above states sin is turning from God and leads to hardship. Repenting, returning to God, confessing and praying brings back his favor. The mixed congregation of Israel was a separated group of people chosen by God to be his. Strangers of other land could have heard of the fame of their God, Israel's God, and come to him, i.e. Israel being a light to the Gentiles, so that the whole world have access to God's salvation through obedience to the laws given to the congregation. Now Israel do go away, sin against God, and we read about this, for example, in book of Jeremiah, but specifically 25 verse 11 talks about them being put into Babylon for 70 years. The book of Lamentations talks about people eating their children because of the consequences of going away from God. And then we have Daniel's prayer in Daniel chapter 9, how after 70 years God brought them back. First, Daniel did exactly what Solomon said, if they repent and confess their sins. So that's an example of verse 47, etc. in practice. Moving on to verse 54 of chapter 8. And it was so that when Solomon had made an end of praying all this prayer and supplication unto the Yahweh, he arose from before the altar of Yahweh, from kneeling on his knees, with his hands spread up to heaven, and he stood and blessed all the congregation of Israel with a loud voice, saying, verse 57, Yahweh our God be with us, as he was with our fathers. Let him not leave us, nor forsake us, that he may incline our hearts unto him, to walk in all his ways, and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, which he commanded our fathers. Verse 60, that all the people of the earth may know that Yahweh is God, and that there is none else. Let your heart therefore be perfect with Yahweh our God, to walk in his statutes and to keep his commandments, as at this day. So here we have prayers that should be on our knees in humility, not standing. The theme of the world, learning about God, is repeated. Moving on to chapter 9, Yahweh appears to Solomon, reading from verse 1. And it came to pass, when Solomon had finished the building of the house of Yahweh, and the king's house, and all Solomon's desire which he was pleased to do, that the Yahweh appeared to Solomon the second time, as he appeared unto him at Gibeon. And Yahweh said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication, and thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built, to put my name there forever, and my eyes and my heart shall be there perpetually. And if thou wilt walk before me, as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, and to do according to all that I have commanded thee, and will keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised to David thy father, saying, There shall not fall thee a man upon the throne of Israel. If you shall at all turn from following me, you or your children, and will not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then will I cut off Israel out of the land which I have given them, and this house which I have hallowed for my name will I cast out of my sight. And Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all the people. Verse 20. And all the people that were left, all the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, which were not of the children of Israel, their children that were left after them in the land, whom the children of Israel also were not able utterly to destroy. Upon those did Solomon levy a tribute, a bondservant, unto this day. But of the children of Israel did Solomon make no bondmen, but they were men of war, and his servants, and his princes, and his captains, and rulers of his chariots, and his horsemen. And three times in a year did Solomon, verse 25, and 3 times in a year did Solomon offer burnt offerings and peace offerings upon the altar which he built unto Yahweh. And he burned incense upon the altar that was before Yahweh. So he finished the house, and King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezon-Zebah, which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom. And Hiram sent in the navy his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of the sea, with the servants of Solomon, and they came to Ophir, and fetched from thence gold 420 talents, and brought it to King Solomon. So here we see the scriptures say that Solomon made people of the children of Israel his army. Same thing David did. Remember Uriah, I think is his name, Bathsheba's husband, the Hittite, and all these people who served in the armies. So they are part of the congregation of Israel. They're referred to as Israel. Unlike the inhabitants of the land of the Hittites and Amorites and so on, they are called strangers, and they were made bondsmen. So there are some scriptures that say some strangers will be made bondmen. It doesn't refer to the strangers who are part of Israel congregation, because we have seen so far they are made captains and so forth as part of the army and status of Israel. One law shall be for the homeborn, and one law shall be for the stranger. That was the composition of Israel. But the main thing we are to know that so far God is always repeated that if we do something, that's the condition, then he will perform his actions to us. Shalom, until tomorrow, God willing.